We call them mounds. But long before that word carried the weight of dismissal, before they were mistaken for natural hills or forgotten altogether, they were monuments, pyramids, the heart of a city that rivaled anything Europe had built at the time, and most Americans have never heard of it. Beneath the fields of southern Illinois, beneath highways and farmland, beneath the ordinary sprawl of the Midwest, lies the footprint of the largest city north of Mexico before European contact. Its name was Cahokia, and it is hiding in plain sight. Most people assume that before Europeans arrived, North America had no cities, no urban centers, no monuments that required planning, labor, or centralized power. And that assumption feels logical. After all, we are taught that civilization arrived with colonization, that cities, governance, and architecture were imported, not inherited. But that story is incomplete, because at the same moment Paris was being built, at the same moment London was rising as a medieval power, Cahokia was already a metropolis, not a village, not a settlement. A city with a population larger than London's. The year is 1050. The place, the Mississippi River floodplain near the confluence with the Missouri, in a landscape that is flat, fertile, and impossibly green. The air is warm. The river moves slowly, wide and brown. Fed by spring rains, the ground is soft beneath your feet, rich with centuries of sediment. And rising from the center of this floodplain, dominating the horizon, is a pyramid. Not stone, earth. A massive, terraced platform mound, Monks Mound, rising over 10 stories into the sky, covering more ground at its base than the Great Pyramid of Giza. You are standing in the central plaza of Cahokia, surrounded by over 100 other mounds, some smaller, some ceremonial, some residential platforms for the elite, wooden palisades, and this is not wilderness. This is order. This is design. And everywhere, there are people, thousands of them, perhaps 20,000 at the city's peak, more than any other settlement in North America at the time. They speak Siouan languages. They wear clothing woven from plant fibers and animal hides. They trade goods from across the continent, shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians. This is not a society stumbling toward complexity. This is a society that has already arrived. The construction of Monks Mound alone required 14 million baskets of earth, carried by hand, one load at a time, across years, perhaps generations. This was not random. It was intentional. Coordinated. It required leadership, labor organization, and a shared vision powerful enough to mobilize an entire population. At the summit of Monks Mound stood a massive wooden structure, likely the residence of the paramount chief, the leader whose authority stretched across the region. From this height, you could see the entire city below, the plazas, the neighborhoods, the fields stretching toward the horizon. And in the plaza below, at the base of the mound, a circle of wooden posts, Woodhenge, marked the movements of the sun. A calendar, an astronomical instrument, evidence that the people of Cahokia understood the cosmos, tracked the seasons, aligned their rituals with celestial events. This was not primitive. This was science. Imagine a woman in the year 1100 walking through the central plaza at dawn. She is part of a family that serves the temple complex. Her grandfather was one of the laborers who helped build the mound her entire life revolves around. Her mother taught her the songs sung during the solstice ceremonies, songs that honor the sun, the earth, the cycles that sustain the city. She crosses the plaza, passing vendors setting up for the day's trade. She sees men carrying bundles of hides, women arranging pottery, children running between the stalls. She does not know that within 200 years, this city will be empty, that the plazas will be silent, that the mounds will remain, but the people will be gone. She does not know that later settlers will look at these mounds and refuse to believe indigenous hands built them, attributing them instead to a lost race, to Vikings, to anyone but the ancestors of the peoples still living nearby. But in this moment, she is simply walking through her city, which feels as permanent as the earth itself. That is the quiet tragedy of Cahokia. To those who lived there, it felt eternal. And then something shifted. We do not know exactly why Cahokia was abandoned. Climate change likely played a role. Droughts, colder winters, shifts in the river that disrupted agriculture. Political instability may have fractured the alliances that held the city together. Resource depletion, the forests cleared for timber, the fields exhausted from overuse, may have made the city unsustainable. By the time Europeans arrived in the Mississippi Valley in the 1500s, Cahokia had been empty for centuries. The mounds remained, but the knowledge of who built them and why had been dispersed among the descendants who carried it forward in oral tradition. And when French explorers, then American settlers, encountered the mounds, they did not see monuments. They saw curiosities, oddities, hills that seemed too regular to be natural, but too large to be human-made, at least by the peoples they assumed were incapable of such work. So they invented stories. They theorized about lost civilizations, about ancient Europeans, about anyone except the indigenous nations whose ancestors had built them. And in doing so, they erased Cahokia from history. Here is the misunderstanding that persists, that indigenous North America had no cities, because cities require complexity, and complexity was imported by Europeans. But Cahokia was a city, and it was not alone. Across the continent, other societies built urban centers, ceremonial hubs, trade networks. The mound-building tradition stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, lasting for thousands of years. The reason most Americans do not know this is not because the evidence is missing. It is because the evidence was ignored, dismissed, or attributed to anyone but the people who actually built it. And that erasure served a purpose. If indigenous peoples had never built cities, never governed large populations, never created monumental architecture, then the land could be seen as unused, available, waiting. But the land was not waiting. It was full. And Cahokia is proof. This was not the beginning of America. It was the continuation of something far older. Cahokia represents the height of a tradition that began over 3,000 years ago, when the first mounds were built in the lower Mississippi Valley. By the time Cahokia rose, mound-building societies had already been shaping the landscape for millennia, experimenting, adapting, creating. When Cahokia fell, the tradition did not die. It dispersed. The descendants of Cahokia's builders became the Osage, the Quapaw, the Omaha, the Ponca, nations that carried forward the knowledge, the stories, the memory of what had been, and the mounds remained, silent, waiting. Today, Cahokia Mound's State Historic Site sits just outside St. Louis, Missouri. You can walk to the top of Monks Mound. You can stand where leaders once stood, looking out over a landscape that is now farmland, highways, suburbs. The city is gone. The mounds are still here, rising from the flat Illinois prairie, quiet, monumental, undeniable. A pyramid under America, hidden in plain sight. We call them mounds, But now you know they were never just that. They were monuments, evidence, proof that this continent held cities, governance, and complexity long before the word America existed. And beneath the fields, beneath the highways, beneath the ordinary, they are still here, waiting for those willing to see them. If this changed how you see the Midwest, if you realize that civilization was never imported, only rediscovered, then this is only the beginning. Subscribe to Before America, where the story starts before the maps, and the past is never as simple as we were taught.